Hello and welcome to Meet the Changemakers with me, Dr. Audrey Tang. It is the show where I get to speak with people, charities, causes who are all doing something to make a change in their little corner of the world. Now, as you can see, due to some unforeseen circumstances, I haven't been able to get to the studio, but thanks to the magic of Disruptive Live, they are beaming me in remotely for this final show of the first season. And it's a show that I wouldn't be missing for the world. I get to speak to Ben Francoise of Saints Coffee. Now, Saints Coffee is an artisan coffee house and a cocktail bar where I've had the pleasure of going to sample some coffee and cake with the photos to prove it as well. But more than that, it first came to my attention because I saw an article where Ben and his team were offering opportunities for employability to people who would otherwise be marginalised. They'd just come out of prison, or perhaps they couldn't get opportunities elsewhere. And not only are they giving them a trade, but they're really teaching them about coffee and sustainability and giving them a real skill. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Ben to Meet the Changemakers. And I'm going to start off by asking you, Ben, how did your really unique approach to employability come about, and where have you seen that impact?
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you for having me as well. It's a real pleasure to be on with you. In terms of the approach to social impact, to me, it was about how we could use our business, and that's based on my experience in previous careers in training, but also on our team's expertise in hospitality around being baristas, being front of house, mixologists, chefs, and then actually the environment and the equipment within the coffee shop. How could we use that to try and have some sort of social impact? So that was what we wanted to use, those three factors: my experience, the team's experience, and then the actual building and the equipment that we had. And the answer to us was around helping people around employment, as you mentioned, those most marginalised, those furthest from the labour market. And we've had, so far in the first 12 months of trading, we've worked with 19 people who've come from backgrounds as diverse as homelessness. We've had people who've left prison recently. We've had social care leavers. We've had mothers returning from multiple bouts of maternity leave, people with neurodiversity, all sorts of different minorities who've really struggled to get into work. And we just use the environment that we have to most fundamentally build confidence. That's the key, but also give some skills around CV writing, interview skills, job searching, and then actual technical skills around coffee, around cocktails, or in the kitchen. So we just try and use a balance of all of those depending on what the person needs to help them get back into something productive for them, something that they want to do. So of the 19 we've worked with, we've had 12 people go on to employment, some with us, but in other industries as well.
That's amazing. And that's so important, because I think one of the things when you have had these experiences, you haven't had people take a chance on you. You haven't had people take an interest in you even. And that's exactly what you're doing. And you're offering people, it's not just making a cup of coffee. We're talking artisan coffee, which is about fair trade. It's about sustainability. You are teaching so much. Do you mind telling me a little bit more about fair trade and coffee as well, please?
Yeah, I'm definitely no expert, just to be clear. But in terms of the coffee itself, it's really important to me that we understand where it comes from, and we know the provenance of the coffee, how the farmers are growing it, how well they're being paid. And you mentioned the term fair trade, which is a really popular term in a lot of supermarkets, and people try and buy fair trade because they believe they're buying into something where people are being paid fairly. For me, it was about going to Central America, different places that grow coffee, and learning what it is for people and farmers on a local cooperative and what they need to be paid in order for them to live reasonably. Whereas that's not the case with most coffee that people are consuming, unfortunately. So that's why I really got into the area of specialty coffee, because what that drives is better practices around sustainability regarding the land. You can even know the country, sometimes the farm that your coffee has come from, and you know the projects that are treating people fairly to grow that coffee so that they're paid a more reasonable price for what they're growing, which isn't always the case. Well, definitely isn't the case with most commodity coffee, but often isn't even the case with a lot of fair trade coffee. So it's interesting that there's a real space around people understanding the terms that are used. So to give you an example, and I couldn't give you the exact percentages, but my understanding of fair trade coffee is that for something to be labeled as fair trade, not all of that product has to come from a fair trade farm. It's only a certain percentage of it, and it can still be labeled. And it's just something that's kind of grown, and people still think that they're sourcing something sustainably, but actually it's not always the case. So what we wanted to do was go a little bit deeper, understand where the coffee is coming from, and that's where partnering with certain roasteries and understanding the specialty coffee has been very valuable to us.
That's really astute and insightful, because I had no idea. I would go into a shop and see fair trade, be really pleased and go, oh yeah, this is a really great thing. That's something that's really very surprising to me. But I think that's something which really permeates through everything you do. You go so far beneath the surface. And what you're doing with your business as well is you are offering other things to encourage an overall sense of holistic wellness, like well-being walks and a book club and other aspects of social enterprise. What else do you offer, as well as, of course, being a fabulous coffee house?
So to me, we operate obviously as a social enterprise, and that's the employability thing that we talked about. We also do a lot of work with schools, helping children overcome barriers based on my own experience of school and going on to university as well. From a wellness perspective, I wouldn't necessarily label that as social enterprise. I think that's a community business, or a business based in the community, trying to draw people in. And obviously it's pretty well documented how a lot of high streets and a lot of town centres are on the decline. So what we wanted to do was figure out how we could build a sense of community around the coffee shop. And the way we've achieved that is partnering with people and using the shop itself is kind of a vehicle or an incubator for other people who have ideas around an impact they'd like to have. So we've had people come forward and start women's wellness walks. We've had book clubs, as you mentioned. We've had social runs on a Sunday. We've had men's wellness walks that started recently. We've also had menopause groups that meet monthly in the shop, and other things like grief gatherings. So it's all about how we can partner with other organizations or charities or individuals or artists, but enable them to have an impact through the coffee shop as well. And I think that kind of amplifies what we're doing around wellness. We're no experts in any area of these things, but what I think is quite powerful is to give people a space they can come together, and even if it takes a few sessions or a few meetings or a few walks, have that opportunity to open up about something that's important to them.
See, now I think that's actually more important in some ways than the formal things that are out there, because I know, yes, you can go and see a mental health practitioner, and sometimes the waiting list can be terribly long. Sometimes you may not get on with them, which means you have to start that process all over again. But what you're offering are these informal opportunities to connect with other people, to build your sense of community, to be seen and to feel heard, and to meet other like-minded people. And I think that's incredibly invaluable to the community. What sort of impact have you recognized with doing these events?
Well, we see a business impact. So cynics would say you're doing these things for a business benefit, and there is a benefit. It draws more people in, but it actually is helpful as well to different communities. What we've seen is that it kind of snowballs. The more of these things that we do, the more people want to try and do different things, whether it's around, for instance, we nearly tried to get some foraging sessions off the ground so people could have healthy conversations about where food comes from. And that's a conversation we're still having with somebody that runs these foraging and cooking sessions. And that's the kind of benefit or the impact that we see is the opportunity for people to come together and see whether it works for them and find that safe space for them to talk about something, and then be more people trying to start more initiatives as well through quite a small coffee shop to start with.
Now, you're speaking about people starting initiatives, and I know we've spoken about this before in previous interviews, but what if you've got somebody who is watching this and thinking, you know what, I really want to do something, but I don't know what I want to do, and I don't even know how to get started? What advice might you give to a socially minded entrepreneur?
So, born on my own experience of being that kind of person, being part of really large organizations like HSBC, PwC in previous careers, and wanting to have some sort of impact, but always seeing a problem as too big to tackle. And that's what I found kept putting me off. And I'm going to use a consultant's phrase here that I haven't used for a long time, actually, but there's a real tendency to try and boil the ocean. You want to just have a massive impact on a thing that can't be changed by one person. what I found really helpful in the last 12 months as a business and social enterprise, and before that, planning what we wanted to do, was focusing on the individual that we wanted to help, the person that we kind of, or inspired me to think about what change we could try to have. So to give an example of that, I think of my own story of going to what was at the time considered quite an undesirable school in a pretty rough part of town, and then going on to Oxford, and the opportunities that afforded me. Whereas there was a lot of people that I went to school with that could have benefited from that as well, but they didn't have that opportunity. And that's what drives a lot of the projects that we do with schools. And likewise, when it comes to things around wellness, I talked about the partners and the people who started projects through Saints Coffee. But the one we started with was one called Coffee in the Community. And that was based around, I remember vividly, an old lady that I'd see on the way to school, and on the way home from school, she'd come out of the door, stand in the front garden just to be closer to other human beings. And that makes me quite emotional, thinking about different people who are really isolated and don't have an opportunity to be drawn out into the community. And that's why we started Coffee in the Community and hired a minibus and collected people and brought them in every other week so they could build their own friendship group. So really, if you're in that position of not sure what to do, what change you can affect, just think about the individual that you'd like to help rather than the problem, that like, whether it's a problem like racism or anything like that, it's just too big for one person to affect. But if you think about an individual you can help, you might be able to make a change.
That's so helpful, because when you are thinking about that individual, I'm just thinking about, that's a heartbreaking story, but uplifting at the same time, about somebody who just comes out to have a look at the community going on. You talked about having minibuses to bring people in. A lot of people were going to think, oh, well, we'll just start Coffee in the Community, but then not actually recognize that sometimes people can't even get there. And this is an issue I have. We talk about loneliness, and I say to people, oh, there'll be wellness walks, there'll be this, that, and the other. And then suddenly the bus route has changed, or there's no funding. Or so unless we can actually deal with accessibility, we can't do much else. And I think that's so wonderful that you are thinking about, through that individual, what does that one person need? That's really wonderful advice. So we've got somebody who has got this started. They've now got an idea of what they're doing. How do they scale up from there? Or is there a danger of scaling up too quickly?
I think there is. So if you think about scaling a social initiative, in my experience, as with a lot of things, quality is better than quantity. So we have had this experience. We tried to do too much too soon, tried to do too many different projects. What I would say to somebody that's considering that point of scaling up is, actually, are you having the impact that you want to have with the people that you wanted to reach? And even if you're only impacting one person, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, that's really positive. So don't always feel that urgency or that need to keep scaling. And I've seen that with a lot of people who want to start projects with us. They've been doing it for several weeks, several months, and they haven't got above 5, 6, 7 people attending, and then they stop. And I find that to be a real shame, because those people were still benefiting and that thing's stopped now. So there's a tendency to try and scale up too soon, and I've experienced that myself. For those people who are adamant that they still would want to, I think there's an element of understanding how you can scale up without the dependency on yourself. And I think what that can do, how that can be done rather, is through partnering with other people that have similar interests, similar goals. And there are networks out there, whether it's voluntary or charity-based networks in different towns and different counties, that will enable you to find different groups who have the same sort of social goals as you, and you may be able to partner through that way and scale up the impact that you're having. So those would be the two things, kind of contradictory, but one is, if you're happy with the impact you're having, keep having it. But if you want to scale up, you might be able to seek networks of voluntary or social or charity-based organizations that can help you. And then and on that side of trying to scale up, you may be able to partner with businesses that, if we're going to the real cynical side of social enterprise, a lot of businesses will see a benefit in being able to market the fact that they're promoting what you're doing. So their business will benefit, and you may have a larger or bigger platform to reach more people who could benefit from what you're doing. So I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that's what social enterprise is about. So there's a few different avenues if you do want to scale up. But I'd ask the question first, are you having the impact on the people that you want to reach?
That's really helpful. And that actually links to my next two questions, in fact. So let's deal with say you are in a position where you are making the impact and you're doing really well with even those 5, 6 people. And you're so right. If you then stopped because there were only 5 or 6, you have actually taken away something that was so important to these 5 or 6 people. But you've got to that situation and you now want to grow. The tendency, especially for a small business, is to rope in your mates, is to bring in your friends, is to bring in people that you're kind of already familiar with. And I know, having done it, there's this feeling of, oh, because it's my friend, I feel a bit more comfortable. But I don't always think that's the best way of doing things. What would your advice in your experience be?
Well, it's a really difficult one. Friends and family and business is a bit tricky. I wouldn't say I've actually experienced that firsthand. I think the challenge that we have seen more of is around people's willingness to sustain the thing that you want to start. And that could be a business activity or initiative, or it could be a social project. So I've seen it more from that angle of are people willing to stay the course for something? Or are they going to start an initiative that runs for 3 months, helps people, but because it hasn't got as big or as much attention or as much traction as they would have liked, they stop doing it, and then that falls away. So that's what I would be more wary of personally, rather than just working with friends or family. But definitely, if you are going down that route, boundaries are the key, but it's easier said than done, I'm afraid, with friends and family.
No, that's a really helpful response. And just to pull on that thread a little bit longer, when it comes to people maybe not going the distance, are there certain things that you recognize in people that you think, oh, actually, I don't know whether this person is going to carry on? Or do you think just life happens and so on?
Yeah, life does happen, and also often people are going through their own things, right? Whereas I guess that's what you're talking about when you say life happens. People are going through their own things that mean they can't necessarily commit. So what we've learned to ask is around, are you willing to do this for 6 to 9 months? It may look like it's an attractive proposition over the summer, but actually, are you able to continue it through the winter and into the next year, and make sure that the people who are benefiting get that benefit for a longer time? So we try to have that conversation up front now around a lot of the initiatives. But that being said, we will still be willing to try most things, because I'm a firm believer that you have to keep failing to succeed. So you never know what's going to stick. So there aren't many things that we would say no to in terms of initiatives that we think could help people. But we would just, there are a few flags. If people think that they're going to have 50 people at the first session, we try and say, well, that's probably not going to happen. How do you feel about that? So there's a conversation that we can have there, but generally we will still try and work through it and see if we can get that thing off the ground. But they don't always work.
Yeah, I think that's a very realistic approach, actually, but it's also very optimistic. And a lot of the time, certainly in positive psychology, we like talking about optimism rather than being positive and going, yes, it's definitely going to work, because that's the reality of it. And you don't know, I guess, what could happen around us. Relating to your earlier point about those conversations that you have with yourself sometimes, and I think it's really great and open and honest of you to admit that, because a lot of people don't sit there and say, sometimes I do have that conversation asking myself, is this working? Why, is this worth it? How do you sort of galvanize your own resilience and your own inner strength to kind of go through those moments?
Well, I mean, when it comes from kind of that inner voice, or that voice in your mind who's saying, oh, what's the point? Bigger companies or better people than you are trying to solve these problems. And that is true. There are bigger organizations, there are more skilled people. But what I remind myself is that the problem's still there. And those larger organizations, those people with a bigger reach, aren't necessarily able to help the people that are just down the road from the coffee shop that could benefit from this particular initiative or social project or community-based activity. So I do remind myself of that quite regularly, because especially in the first few months of starting, I spent a lot of time trying to partner with larger organizations and didn't really get anywhere, because from their perspective, they're already having that impact, or there's a whole conversation there around competing for funds, etc. But what I learned to tell myself was, actually, the people that need help still need help. These organizations have been around for a while and they haven't solved the problem. So if you're going from that individual focus that I mentioned earlier, there are still people out there that can benefit from a lot of these projects and initiatives.
That's really powerful, because I think you're absolutely right. Although there may be some very big initiatives and movements and campaigns going on, they don't reach everybody. And that little shop in the middle of town where people can just go to, that's the place that's going to make the difference. I think that's absolutely wonderful. Do you have any particular people or instances where you can sit there and go, oh, you know, I did that you can reflect on and know that you've made that impact?
There are some people we've worked with. So one of our longest standing team members actually joined through the employability program, and she's been with us for 14 months and came from a standing start of no experience in hospitality, some real kind of challenges in her personal life, and now is really an excellent barista, can do all of the cocktails, can make any. She's a core member of the team, and that personally for me makes me feel quite proud that we've been able to have that effect for somebody. There are other instances that aren't actually directly through me, but I know that's kind of what I believe in with the coffee shop. I was told a tale by my partner who goes on the women's wellness walks of a woman whose daughters were explaining to her or persuading her to go on the women's wellness walk on Mother's Day. And the mum felt guilty because she wanted to spend it with her daughters, but the daughters saw how powerful and how much it had done for this lady to go on this walk every 2 weeks for the last year, that they wanted her to go on the walk and then they could do something for Mother's Day afterwards. And I like that. That to me is quite powerful, because I think that means you're having that impact of giving people the safe space. And she's obviously going home and talking about it with her daughters, and they understand how much it means to her. So things like that make it worthwhile for me.
Yeah, they really do. And that sort of thing also shows you the ripple effect that positivity is having, because not only is this woman talking about it, but they recognize it, and maybe those daughters will also go on to inspire somebody else. I think that's absolutely wonderful. Now, we talk a lot about resilience and getting through adversity, and of course we need to have adversity and failures in order to thrive. What would you say to, I guess, your own inner critic, or to other people, to encourage them when they are sad about, oh, I've only got one person turning up, or I think I've only impacted one person?
Yeah, I've had that conversation with myself, and I think to me it's about spheres of influence. Who can you affect? What sort of change can you have? What sort of impact can you have? Or change can you make? Some people have the good fortune of impacting millions, like Greta Thunberg and some of these really inspirational characters that are in our world. Other people might actually only help one person or several people, but that is still a change. So rather than thinking of it as only being one person, I'd rather say it is one person. That's somebody you've helped. And that's a conversation I've had with myself through difficult times, especially around the employability program, which took longer to get off the ground than I would have liked, and had a few false starts as well. But we did in that time, rather than having 20 people join in the first cohort, we had one person, and I thought that wasn't enough, but actually it was, because that was the person that went on to become a core team member, and so on and so forth. So I think it's about understanding the quality, as I mentioned before, rather than the quantity, and just staying the course as well. It's a phrase I say to myself probably once a week now, is like, just keep going, see what comes out of the other end of this.
That's really inspirational. That's really important to take away with us. And so what is next for you, in terms of, you do so much already, and you give talks, you do training, you do a lot of different things. What's on your agenda?
I think the next 6 to 9 months for me is around growing the business, because that's what sustains all of these things. And the more units we have that are stable, profitable, and popular, the more we can do, and the more we can spread these social activities to different towns or larger numbers of people involved. So we've just opened our second shop in Stony Stratford. The first one's in Northampton, and we're looking at a second unit for a different concept in Northampton, as more of a restaurant than a coffee shop. And we just want to keep growing the business in that way, because then we can, once it's stable, once the business is doing well, we're able to then expand the social projects as well.
That's fabulous. Then where can we get hold of you or follow you on Instagram or all of your social platforms?
Yeah, I should have worn the jumper with our Instagram on it. Sorry, it's too warm.
That's all right. Next time.
So you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Saints Coffee with an underscore, all one word with an underscore at the end. You'll be able to find us and learn more about what we do on our website, saintscoffee.co.uk. A lot of the information's there, but most of it comes through Instagram and Facebook.
And if you have one message to anybody who wants to make those changes, what would it be?
I think just break it down to the individual that you want to help rather than thinking about a huge problem that seems unsolvable from an individual's perspective. If you're trying to help one person, you can do that as a person, whereas larger problems are harder to break down. So focus on that individual.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you for tuning in to this season of Meet the Changemakers. It's been a real pleasure to speak to so many wonderful people making a real difference with their corner of the world. And if you do want to revisit any of our previous episodes, we have got Lorraine and Lee, who are demonstrating the power of a gift, especially for people who may not realize anyone has their back. Diane and Andrea, who are campaigning for getting women's health really firmly on that agenda because of their own experiences of misdiagnosis. Anne Wankiri and the United African Association, who are meeting the needs of a diverse community, because that is something that we overlook, inclusivity as well as diversity. Alessandra Bester, who is employing single women and women with autism to improve and deliver her wonderful chocolatier business. Sarah and Matt reminding us that gambling can take hold very, very quickly, but there is help if you simply reach out. And of course, our wonderful guest today, Ben Francoise, who simply reminds us that we are the people who can be the change that we want to see. Thank you so much for tuning in. Good evening.